Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio, and it's 9:30 p.m. Wednesday night, April 21st, Calgary, Alberta. I'm just happy to be here. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us. It's a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast, and we're going to continue on talking about family violence. It's an article that I found at www.familyviolence.alberta.ca, and this article is really in regards to child abuse and family violence, the connection there. It's a great article, and we've already gone through probably about half of it now, so we're about halfway through, and it's just some great information for people. We just can't hear enough about child abuse, and that's why I'm doing this show. I just believe that child abuse is not talked about enough, even though there's lots of voices out there, thank God, and I just want to be one more voice, just to add my voice to everyone else's out there who's, are promoting awareness and education and prevention of child abuse. It's so important, and, I'm just glad to be able to do this show and to be a part of it, because the more people we get standing up and, raising their voices, to help children and to help change this thing, the better. We need everyone's voice. And, sadly enough, there's so many that will just sit on the sidelines, as I did for so many years, not getting involved. But that's, at some point you just hope that people will just say, that's right, we have to stand up for children. We have to change these laws, and we really have to change the way society thinks about child abuse and child abuse prevention. So I'm just so happy to be here. And it's not a professional show. I don't hold any professional certificates or counseling certificates, therapist certificates, anything like that. I'm just a person. I study child rights, human rights at MRU part-time here in Calgary, Alberta. I'm in between classes because I can't afford to go right now. But I'm still studying, and I'm still, referencing and looking for material regarding child rights and human rights. And child abuse just sits really heavy with me because I'm a survivor myself of child abuse, and I just think that silence is the problem. Just pushing it under the rug, putting it, locking it behind a closed door. Nobody wants to hear about it. Nobody wants to deal with it. But it's going on and needs to stop. So, that's why I'm doing this show, just to be one more voice out there, just to let people know that we have to really work on ways to find ways to actually prevent child abuse and completely stop it. And so, it's not, listen at your own discretion, please, because I cover all abuse topics, really, domestic violence, sexual abuse, child abuse, and just anything to do with abuse. So if the topic of abuse bothers you, please turn the show off. I always ask people to listen at their own discretion because we have to know ultimately what is good for us to listen to, and if this topic of abuse of any kind will bother you, then you have to turn the show off. It's your right, and really you should know whether or not it will bother you or not, and just listen at your own discretion, please, because we don't want anybody to be uncomfortable. The topics of abuse are very sensitive, and so you want to be sure that you're okay listening to the show. And also, younger people, children under the age of 18, youth and whatnot, I really fight for child rights. I stand up for child rights. I'm a child abuse advocate. I advocate against child abuse. I just think that online safety is such an issue with children. Children are dying at the hands of child sexual predators. How are they getting a hold of these children? Quite often online, over the internet. I think that if young people will start getting into the habit of letting someone know what they're doing online, they could save their lives. They could save their friends' lives by telling them too. And the whole issue is that all you have to do is look in the paper. It's for real. It's not a joke, and it's not a pretend thing. It's not a made-up thing. Kids are dying, and all at the hands of child sexual predators who get a hold of them through information that they get from them online, or they'll pose as someone your own age, maybe a younger person. They'll say, "Oh, I'm 14. I like to skateboard or whatever. Meet me at the skateboard park," and it turns out to be a child sexual predator, and then your life will either be in danger or you will be sexually assaulted by a child sexual predator. So that is why it's so important to have someone know what you're doing online. And this is this is all about child abuse and preventing child abuse. But the whole issue is there's a lot of adult-oriented material in it, and I don't know where the players are now, so I don't know, how many young people are listening to the show. So I think it's important to let someone know what you're listening to, and they can help you decide whether or not you should be listening to it. And also, if you have questions regarding the material, then they can help you find the answers. I just think it's so important. So we'll get right on to the show here. We have about 25 minutes left, and we left off with how can you tell if a child is being abused, and this is page 5 of this article that I found at www.familyviolence.alberta.ca, and it's a great article. Last Monday night we were looking at exposure to violence and the effects that it has on child development, with like fear, aggression, withdrawal, weakened family bonds, and whatnot. We also looked at children and youth having additional reactions, like for instance, shame and isolation. Children and youth in abusive homes often feel shame about their homes and family, and not only is there abuse and violence, but there may also be alcohol and drug use, isolation, seeking alternative family. Children and youth in abusive situations, I'm just reading from the page, may look for a place where they can feel safe and accepted. This may be a group of friends, a gang, or a community group such as a sports team, and there is certainly a risk of young people attaching themselves to a group that is involved in high risk or illegal activities, and I know that's what I did. Because my home was not safe, and my home was abusive and violent, and I actually, excuse me, I spent a lot of time on the streets. I didn't, live on the streets, but I was actually on the streets quite a bit and hanging around with people who were sort of living in similar situations as myself. A lot of my friends were abused and came from abusive homes as well, and different types of situations, but we all kind of relied on each other, looked out for each other, and got involved with a lot of drugs, and it's just bad because that can happen, right? And it's unfortunate. Some of my friends are not with us today because of that, and it's just a sad thing for kids to end up on the streets doing drugs when really, they have the right to a life with, where they can feel safe, a home that is full of, like where they're protected and they're loved and they're looked after, and instead of that, they're out on the streets doing drugs and hanging around with possible gang members and getting into trouble and whatnot, instead of being involved in a community and sports teams and just really having a good life, right? So it's very hard on children, and it affects their entire whole lives, right? They might take on adult responsibilities. There could be substance abuse. Some youth may become involved in alcohol or drug use, running away. Some youth in abusive homes run away in their early or mid-teens and set out on their own. They may return home or be taken home several times before they finally leave for good. And the trauma of living in an abusive and or chaotic home changes a child's brain in unhealthy ways. But the brain can heal over time if the child has a safe, predictable, and loving place to live. Suggestions for things you can do to help the children are listed on page 7 of this booklet, and suggestions for getting help are listed at the back of this booklet. So this booklet has lots of resources and different like links and references and stuff to go over. It's a great article, and the whole article is very good. So we'll continue on tonight. We're going to look at how can you tell if a child is being abused. It says clues that a child or young person may be in an abusive environment. And I'm just reading right from the page. You can pull this up and read through with me. Not all abused or neglected children have the following characteristics. Not all children who show these characteristics live in abusive or violent homes. However, if you observe the following, be aware that the child or young person may be abused, neglected, or exposed to abuse. If you have any doubt or questions, contact your local Child and Family Services Authority or delegated First Nations agency. And the following are signs that a child or young person may be neglected or abused or living in an abusive or violent environment. Signs of possible neglect are a child who is often hungry, dirty, or not dressed for the weather, a young child often left alone, a child or young person who seems to take on adult responsibilities, like often taking care of younger brothers and sisters, doing household tasks, or trying to look after a parent. And there's withdrawal, a child who does not have energy or is very passive, a child who does not seem curious or interested in the sights, sounds, or people in the environment, and a child who refuses to participate in or dress appropriately for physical activities. There's aggressiveness, a child who is often aggressive, angry, and hostile to other people. Bullying, a child or youth who bullies others. That's another sign that there may be abuse going on in the home. And that was my case. When I was young, I was quite aggressive because my mother was very aggressive towards me, and I just kind of in turn took on that behavior. And when little kids would come up to me, kids really my peers, my own age, would come up to me to give me a hug. We're talking, 6, 7, 8 years old. I would just push them away or push them down, or, if I didn't like something a kid was doing, like a friend of mine, I would just slap them, And then, of course, if my mom saw me doing that, then I would get beaten on for that. But really, I was just copying what she was doing. So children will copy and mimic what is going on quite often in the home, and what they're witnessing, and also what they might be being subjected to, right? So if you see aggressiveness in a child, then that could be a possible clue that there is abuse going on in the home of some type, whether it's domestic violence, domestic abuse, or child abuse, right? Fear, a child who appears to be extremely watchful, a child who is wary of the parents' reactions, watching to figure out if a certain behavior is in line with what the parents will accept, and a child who finds loud noises or loud voices unusually startling. And that was me too. I was very much affected by the abuse in my home growing up, as I really from day one, my parents were not getting along for probably 25 years before I was even born. And they continued on, the abuse all the way through their whole marriage. And so I never really knew a time where there wasn't fear or anxiety or something going on, violence and something going on in the home, as my parents did not treat each other as a marital couple. They were very abusive towards each other and abusive towards all of us. So, I grew up in fear. I had a lot of anxiety issues, a nervous kind of like nervous things, nervous habits. I was always kind of leery about being in the room with my parents, looking for signs that there would be an explosive argument, or, loud noises would bother me. If I heard loud noises like firecrackers, I would start crying. And people just thought I was a crybaby, but see, nobody was paying any attention to the fact that I was being abused, right? And they even people that did know about it didn't do anything about it. So, this is what happens to children, right? Physical injuries, unexplained bruises or injuries, especially in places where children do not usually get hurt when they play or move around. Bruises or injuries where the explanation does not match the nature of the injuries. Bruises and or burns that leave a pattern outlining an object may have been used to make the burn, for example, a cigarette, iron, or electric stove burner. Burns on the hands, feet, or buttocks from scalding water, and rope burns from being tied. So physical injuries, you have to really look out for kids. It's easy really to spot physical injuries, much easier than to spot psychological abuse, emotional abuse, and a lot of sexual abuse too. Some sexual abuse is very noticeable, but some isn't, and so just depending. So, it's very important to know the signs and symptoms of child abuse, what to look for, right? Because kids will not often or cannot speak up for themselves, and there's possibility that their lives have been threatened. The abuser will threaten to kill their family, or they'll threaten to kill their pets or their friends, and they'll just say, okay, let's keep this between you and me. We don't want to upset the rest of the family. All kinds of different things abusers will do to manipulate children so that they don't tell, right? And sexual behaviors. A child who knows more about sex than is normal for the age. A child who knows more about sex than is normal for the age. And a child who behaves sexually around adults or other children. And a child who hints or talks outright about sexual abuse. So these are things that, children, should be allowed to be children. And, if a child is showing signs that they know more about sex than someone their age really should, they've either been watching a lot of TV that they shouldn't be watching, or videos, or something, you know what I mean? Or they've seen or experienced sexual abuse. So you have to really pay attention to this stuff if you're a parent, and really watch your child's behavior if you notice this type of thing, because it's a real sign and it's a real clue that there could be something going on. It's really worth investigating, because you could save your child from being abused sexually or in any other way. So important. And a child or teenager who runs away from home over and over again, right? There's obviously a problem. If a child or a teenager keeps running away from home, there's got to be a problem. And even if it's just a problem with the child, and there's maybe some emotional problems or psychological, mental issues, right? Then the child deserves to get help and not be left to run on the street. So, the whole thing is really bad. And I see kids, I haven't seen too many around here, but I know down in the States, I used to see lots and lots of young people on the street, especially like in Las Vegas, because my family used to go to Las Vegas quite often and drag us kids along, and we'd be out running around by ourselves at like the age of 10 years old, running around on the streets of Las Vegas while my parents were gambling and stuff. And some people thought that was really cool. My friends would be like, "Oh, you're so lucky you get to go on these trips." Well, actually, I was kind of just sort of forced into going, and as much as I wanted to go, just to take a family trip, right? We were left on our own, and I used to see these kids running around, and I knew that they were runaways, and I knew what they were doing. They were child prostitutes. So it's so bad, it's so awful, it's not even funny, but most people wouldn't even recognize that, you know what I mean? They wouldn't recognize it. It's not something people, if they haven't heard about it or don't know about it, they wouldn't even recognize it. And I think abused people often recognize each other. And I could see these kids, and I thought, what are these kids doing standing around with backpacks on street corners? I know why I'm here, because my parents wanted, or my mom wanted to go gamble, but the thing is I don't know what those kids are doing standing around by themselves with a backpack looking pretty homeless, you know what I mean? So it's sad, it's happening, it's going on around us, and even though most of, mainstream society just does not want to acknowledge it or pay any attention to it, we know that these kids are out here and we know what's happening, and if they run away and they feel that it's better for them to be on the street, then you can imagine what their home life is like. That's my issue. That's what I'm bringing up. It's a dangerous place on the streets, and kids would probably not rather opt to be on the street. But if they feel unsafe in their home, or if they've been abused in any way, or whether it's psychological, emotional, sexual, physical, doesn't matter what the abuse is. Abuse is abuse, and it hurts. And a lot of kids just cannot tolerate it, and they will run away and take their chances on the street. And that's sad. It's really got to stop. And so if you make sure, if you have a teenager or a child that runs away, make sure you get help for them. Don't just leave them on the street and say, well, it was their choice to run away or whatever, just like throwaways, right? Because they deserve a chance to have a good life, and they won't get it out there on the street doing drugs. They'll end up dead or just so burned out or abusing drugs and overdosing and stuff like that. So, you don't want that to happen to your child, and they do deserve help. And they don't deserve to be abused, and it's just, it's horrible, just absolutely horrible. So it says here, there's grounds for hope. What we know about children who grow up with abuse and become healthy adults. Children who grow up in abusive homes and become healthy adults. Children who grow up in unhealthy environments but become healthy adults often have several of the following three experiences. Number one, the children understand abuse is not normal. At some point, the children are exposed to a healthy environment and healthy relationships between people. They realize that not everybody lives the way they do, and they become aware that what is happening in their home is violent. They learn that violence and abuse are not normal or acceptable, and that it does not have to be that way. And in my case, that's exactly what happened. I grew up in a violent home, and I thought it was just, I was scared, and it was scary, and I was living very, very much in fear, but it was normal. It was the norm. And so I used to hang around with a girl on my block who lived on my block, and her parents were just normal, and they just loved each other, and they loved their children. And I used to go over there and have dinner and stuff. They used to set a place for me at the table, which was, our family didn't eat together because it was just too much of an opportunity for violence, right? So, we didn't really come together as a family around the table. Everybody just ate sort of whatever they ate, you know what I mean? It wasn't like a normal family situation. And so I used to go to their house, and of course they'd set the table, they'd set a place for me. That would be like the first time that someone outside of the family would do this for me, and I really felt very welcomed, into that family's life. And they didn't yell at each other, they didn't scream at each other, they didn't throw things at each other, which was very commonplace in our house, in the kitchen especially. My mom was just famous for throwing food, throwing hot plates of food, throwing hot coffee on people in their face, She was just a violent, vicious woman. Well, she grew up. She was abused as a child, so she was copying what her mother was doing, right? And she never got any help or tried to change it because she was in a horrible marriage that she was just, she was manic depressive. She had so many problems, right? And so, this is the behavior that we had at home, so it was kind of scary to be in the kitchen with her. And so just to be able to sit around with these people in a normal, relaxing environment, I started to realize that, hey, my home life was a lot different, and I really liked it better at their house. And I remember being about 12 years old and thinking when I met these people, and I thought, wow, this is so much different than my house. And I had other friends. There was other friends of mine that I used to hang around at their houses, but they used to make fun of me. The parents would kind of make fun of me and look down on me, so I didn't feel all that comfortable. Even though I hung around with their daughter, the parents would make fun of my behavior instead of questioning it and saying, maybe there's something wrong. Maybe there's something going on in that house, and maybe we should investigate and call, Child Protective Services, because we had an intervention done when I was a toddler, and we were not removed from the home. My parents were told to court-ordered counseling for my parents, but they only went twice, and then we left the country. And then we moved back, so they were out of the eyes of the social services and child protection, and so the abuse just continued. And you'd think that these families would have sort of clued in that there was something wrong, but people don't know, right? And then what they don't know, they can't prevent, right? That's why primary prevention is really the key. Education is the key to prevention, right? And the more people that are aware of the situations surrounding abuse, the signs and symptoms especially, and really to not look out, because you never know which child down the street is being abused right now or will lose their life tonight at the hands of a caregiver or a parent or some sort of child sexual predator, so a friend of the family or something, right? So it's so important to know and to be on the lookout for the kids around us. We really have to, because they're dying every day around us, right? It's just horrible. So, I saw a normal family, and it really started to take a sort of effect on me. And I realized at the time, my family was different, and that, but that's just the way it was in my home. I had been so used to it. That's the way it was. But I used to appreciate the fact that their home was so much more calmer and peaceful, and I felt like I could relax a little bit over there, and so it was awesome. It was great to see that. And then they say here, number 2, children who grow up in abusive homes and become healthy adults, a healthy role model takes an interest in them. This person treats them with respect. The children's opinions and feelings matter to the person, and he or she believes the children are worthwhile people. And a healthy role model has high expectations of the children, believes in them, and says, of course you can. And a healthy role model helps them to believe that they can have a better life no matter what has happened in their family. And he or she gives children hope that a better life is possible. And like, for instance, the family really was the only family that, the one that I just was talking about there, that actually stepped in and told me that I did not deserve to be abused, because they actually stepped in because I went to their home because my mom had cracked my head with a rolling pin, and they actually looked after me really for almost a couple of years. At that point, they stepped in and intervened on my behalf, and they told me, that was not acceptable behavior, and I did not deserve to be treated that way. And that meant a lot to me, absolutely, because they were the only ones that had ever done that. And other people had known about the abuse and actually suggested that my mom actually abused me even more. I'm not kidding. People would say, "Oh, she's a bad kid. She's a brat. Just smack her," right? And of course, my mom would do it, right? Because my mom would just use any excuse to keep me, under her thumb, right? And so, just really bad behavior. And the rest, there's no reason for that. And I had to forgive those people just because the anger and the hatred and the hurt, in my heart was eating me up and killing me. So I have to forgive people. So no, I don't hold it against them. But I hope they can sleep at night. That's all I have to say. So number 3, the children have reasons to believe in themselves. So there is hope, right? The children believe they are good at something. And the children believe they can influence or control some parts of their lives. And in your contact with all children and young people, those who appear to be safe and healthy and those who appear to be in high-risk environments, you can make sure that you treat them with courtesy and respect. You demonstrate healthy, respectful behavior between adults, and you notice their strengths and gifts, and you help them to believe in themselves. So that's, where a child, who grew up in an abusive home and becomes a healthy adult. They probably ran into some good mentors, some good role models. They might have seen a family that was interacting as a normal family, because every family has problems, but there's ways to cope and deal with them without getting violent and without abuse, right? And so homes that, people don't abuse each other, but they talk things out, they work things out, and, when they get to see that, it does allow them to see some normal behaviors, which is very important, absolutely. And then just, people that would bolster up a child and say, you can do it, you can do anything you put your mind to. And that's so important to say to a child, and especially if you actually know a child who has been abused and, has, already been removed from the home from CPS or DHS or one of the child protection agencies, right? It's so important to tell to be that person for a child, right? And it says what to do if a child tells you about abuse. We have about 4 minutes left. If a child tells you about abuse, number one, listen. This is so important. We have to know how to report abuse. It's so important. Number one, listen to what the child has to say without interrupting or judging. Number two, believe the child. Number three, assure the child that abuse is not their fault. No one deserves to be hurt or abused. If a child tells you about abuse, do not ask for details. Listen to the information the child gives you. Record it as soon as possible in the child's own words. And be supportive and let the child know it is right to tell someone. So, you have to listen to what the child has said without interrupting or judging. Believe the child. Assure the child that the abuse is not their fault and that, they didn't deserve it. And if a child tells you about abuse, don't ask for details. Listen to what the child is telling you. Record it as soon as possible in the child's own words, and then be supportive and tell them that they did the right thing by telling someone. It says, when you are with the child, find a private, quiet place to listen. Listen calmly and without judging. Let the child talk without interruption for as long as the child wants. If you must ask a question to understand what the child is telling you, wait until the child has stopped talking and then ask your question, and that way you don't get them sidetracked, right? And it says, reassure the child. Reassure the child that it is right to tell. And tell the child that the abuse is not the child's fault. Tell the child you do not deserve to be abused. Nobody does. Acknowledge how the child might be feeling. And say, I'll try to help. Close the discussion. Ask, is there anything else you'd like to say now? Explain what you will do next. And again, reassure the child that telling is the right thing to do. And tell the child you will have to report the abuse. Someone will help them. And it says, when you are no longer with the child, write down what you saw and heard as the child was talking to you. Quote the child's words as much as possible. Use words that describe things you can see or hear. For example, a bruise almost covered the child's left knee, and red welts were on the child's upper left arm. Not the child had been hurt, right? You have to be very specific. The child said, I'm scared to go home because my dad is going to be mad at me. Not the child seemed afraid of the father, right? It has to be very specific information. And keep your notes and information confidential and secure, but report immediately to authorities. And we have about a minute left. We'll continue on with the rest of this on Friday night, and same time, 9:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and you can check out our website, http://dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com, and there's a child abuse handbook on there. It's a free PDF download written by best-selling author Donna Shear. She's also the president of Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. It was co-authored by Sandra Dawn Potter, who is the CEO and founder of Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. The Child Abuse Handbook, it's a free PDF download full of all kinds of awesome information regarding signs and symptoms of child abuse, how to report it, what to look for, what is child abuse, just everything you can think of. It's a great handbook. It's free. It's PDF download, and I got mine. And there's great resources and links in there as well. You can also check out the website. There's so much good information on there. It takes a while to get through it, but it's worth it because it is extensive. And so you want to go and check that out. There is some great information on there regarding everything to do with child abuse prevention and child abuse itself and all the issues surrounding it. It's also a great place for survivors survivors as I'm a survivor, and I love to hang out on that website because it is for me ultimately. And so I can't thank them enough. I can't thank Sandra Dawn Potter for doing what she did, starting Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and then all of the people who volunteer, this awesome group of people who volunteer for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. I just thank them from the bottom of my heart. And it means a lot to me as a survivor, and I'm also very happy to stand with them and be a part of it. So take care, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll be talking to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.